And hello, welcome along. It's Kathy Frey here, and welcome to this week's IMCO Maternity Natural Health webinar. So hello to Julie.
Hello.
Very nice to have Julie here again, and we've got a fascinating topic that we're going to be talking about today, because it is just so useful to know. And we're going to be talking about how lactation is such an effective and natural form of contraception, but which I think a lot of women are often fearful about using as not being so reliable. That's where we're going to teach you about that today, or Julie's going to. And just a little sort of overview there about Julie. She's a naturopath and an international board certified lactation consultant who's been working with mothers and their babies for more than 2 decades now. And Julie's got both clinical and academic interests, especially in that postnatal wellness and lactation management sort of area. And she provides a very integrative approach to postnatal help and healthcare. So Julie completed training as a natural fertility awareness teacher in 2005, and believes that natural fertility awareness is an empowering skill for women, that's for sure, and that health professionals can play an important part in it's the role of supporting this and explaining how it all works. So welcome along, our wonderful Julie. And to those who are live with us, we would love you to enter in a little chat as to whereabouts you are in the world and your role as a healthcare professional, or maybe you're a mum. And so put that in there. We'd love to hear from you. And also don't forget that if you've got any particular questions for Julie, just type them into the Q&A button, which is typically at the bottom of your screen. And we'll absolutely make sure that we cover off those questions during the session. So L.A.M, I guess the big
L.A.M.
Yes, the natural baby spacer. I guess the first question is, well, what is it?
Okay, so L.A.M, otherwise known as L.A.M, nature's baby spacer. It is the lack of fertility that results from breastfeeding. So really, it's something that women and midwives have known about for thousands of years. We've been using it. It's been part of our toolbox. It didn't have a name, and of course, science only caught up in about the 80s, the late 80s, when they took a look at what was actually going on here, and kind of created some guidelines around how you might be able to harness breastfeeding and use that for contraception.
Wow, I didn't realize that the science behind it was only really researched, in the 80s. That's crazy. Because
it is crazy. But the amazing thing about that is that we have a massive pool of research since then, and it's such a well-researched topic now, and we do have a really good understanding of how it works and its effectiveness, and some great guidelines for introducing it to women and getting them to work with it in a really useful and effective way.
Brilliant. I mean, I was always taught, and you might correct me if I'm wrong on this, that basically when a woman is exclusively fully breastfeeding or breast milk feeding, because it includes breast milk as well as milk that the baby suckles directly from the breast, but as long as that baby's being fed up to 4 hourly during the day and up to 1 6 hourly overnight, that the chances of her ovulating are incredibly low, lower than if she was not breastfeeding and she was using regular hormone birth control. Am I on track with saying that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've got some interesting data here from the WHO that'll let's just have a quick look at LAM compared to some other popular postnatal birth control methods. So if we look at the progesterone only pills, 0.3 pregnancies per 100 women per year with consistent and correct use, and an effectiveness rate of 7 pregnancies per 100 women as commonly used. So that's with all of the usual mistakes of forgetting to take the pill. So
talking about 93% effective, which is not as effective as I think a lot of women assume it would be.
Exactly.
That's almost a 1 in 10.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite big. LAM, by contrast, is 0.9 pregnancies per 100 women with
not even one
perfect use. That's right.
Wow. So almost 99%.
Yeah, that's right. Wow. With perfect use. So and there are ways that you can actually really increase the effectiveness of it as well if you are concerned that you can't trust the criteria.
Okay. So why? We'll go into that. So I guess the next question would be, why use it?
Well, it's absolute no fuss.
Because it's there.
Because it's no fuss, because you don't have to think about it, because science knows that in the first 6 months postnatal, the chances of you getting pregnant if you're fully breastfeeding are very, very slim. So I guess the important thing to mention about LAM, we should probably talk a little bit more about what it is. Well, let's start with the Bellagio consensus statement, which was developed in 1988. That's really where this whole method was born, and that says that a postpartum woman has at least 98% protection from pregnancy for 6 months when she remains amenorrheic and fully or nearly fully breastfeeds. So she has to, in order to get that protection from pregnancy, she has to have not had a period since her baby was born, and she needs to be fully or nearly fully breastfeeding. So that's a really really important distinction, and I think it brings about one of the really big benefits of LAM, and that's that it encourages optimal breastfeeding behavior.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that exclusive and fully breastfeeding is best for your baby. We know that. The earlier that artificial milk is introduced, it impacts. The earlier it's introduced and the level of volume that it's introduced at, all drastically impacts the neonatal health, the child health, and the adult health of that child. We know that. Absolutely. So that although we could go into some of those facts, you might have, but so that's kind of indisputable. So and we also know that if women receive adequate support to successfully establish breastfeeding, that the great majority of them go on and do very, very well. But it's that, it's that first couple of weeks after having a baby where, if they don't get that support, it's sort of the wheels can fall off it. But get that support and you're just right, it all just comes right. It takes a month or so, doesn't it?
That's right. You've just got to get over that mountain.
Yeah, you just got to get over that mountain and just say, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes in that first month to get it right. I'm not going to expect it to all going to be perfect on day 4. It's not going to be. And occasionally really it is, sometimes.
I've heard it can be.
It can be, yeah, but not that often, especially with firsts. And so and then the side benefit is that you're not ovulating, which means you're not menstruating. and of course, that's Mother Nature's way to protect her species by saying, look, you've already got this tiny human being that your body is needing to look after. It's not time to have another baby yet. So often your libido goes down anyway, which is absolutely fine. It's natural. It's the last thing your body wants to be doing at the moment is getting pregnant again. And so you just get into that 6 months and enjoy it, because you're never ever got to get it back. And then, of course, the magical thing at 6 months onwards is when the solids start to get introduced. And typically by about 9 months of age, the dominant food for that child is now solids.
Yeah. That's right. So you're not going to be the baby's only source of food for very long.
Yeah,
it's very transient.
Very transient when you sort of add up the whole, 18 years plus, you sort of blink and that period of time just went away so quickly, but it's very, very precious.
That's right.
So
I think it's really important, sorry, Kathy, just to just to mention that breastfeeding doesn't just benefit babies, it benefits mums as well. That's
true. Yeah.
Chronic disease, risk management, it has a protective effect against certain types of cancers, osteoporosis, anemia. There are a number of benefits for mums that it's right there waiting for you to grab it, and you don't have to go fully exclusive breastfeeding to get those benefits if that's not something that you're able to manage.
Awesome. Okay, so do you want to sort of we've talked about its effectiveness, which is stunning in comparison to contraception, hormone-based contraception. But why some and we know that the benefits for the baby of having that exclusive breast milk and the benefits of the mother. But who do you find as a lactation consultant that are the women that, that I guess, so who are the main people asking about it, and who are the people who are not asking about it that you really think should be?
What a great question. Well, I think that really everybody should be asking about it. It's something that everybody can consider during pregnancy, which is the ideal time to be thinking about L.A.M, and of course the time that women it's what you're going to do for contraception after your baby's born is like the last thing you're thinking of during pregnancy. But that is a fantastic thing to think about during pregnancy, because preparing for optimal breastfeeding behavior is a really important step in being successful on the other side. So who's it for? It's for women that are motivated to breastfeed, to breastfeed according to the conditions that help to bring about that state of lactational amenorrhea. And it's for women that are motivated not to get pregnant. So women that feel like they are able to continually ask themselves if they meet the criteria for L.A.M, and when they do decide that they don't meet the criteria for L.A.M, that they're able to either accept a pregnancy or find another form of contraception that they're comfortable with.
Okay, so I mean, that brings us to the criteria. So what are those 3 criteria?
Well, those 3 criteria, the first one, and probably the most important one, is have you had a menstrual bleed since your baby was born? Of course, that indicates a return to fertility or an impending return to fertility. Often with the first postpartum bleed, you actually bleed before you ovulate, so it can actually be a sign that ovulation is approaching. But of course, it can also be the other way around, and it's probably more likely and more normal for it to be the other way around. So that's
meaning that you ovulated before you've menstruated, which is how when women are not necessarily exclusively breastfeeding and using the L.A.M method, and that's why why it's possible for women to be pregnant again without having had a period, because they've ovulated, they've had that first ovulation, become pregnant, and then there's no period. And that can be an absolute joy. That happened to me between our first and second, and I was stoked. So, but that again, it was sort of around about that 8 to 9 months when the baby's gone into solid, so obviously the body cranks up again.
Yeah.
But so it's the whole that you ovulate usually before you menstruate, but occasionally after having a baby, it is possible that you might have a bit of a pseudo menstruation before your body cranks into ovulating again.
Yeah.
And when it does crank into ovulating, it can take a bit to kind of get things going.
That's right. It can take some time.
Yeah, it does. And, quite often women can kind of feel that bit of malaise. They're like, oh, golly, I am ovulating, returning far out, So the PMS kind of aspect can be a little bit heavier duty than it's used to, because your body's been switched off for a year.
That's right. And it's a sort of a slow switching on. It's often not a sudden thing. It can happen quite slowly, and you do get some signs that things are changing. And it can be a really good time to learn other natural fertility awareness skills, which can be really helpful later on.
So sorry, I digressed us. So we've got the 3 criteria is firstly the fact that you haven't actually menstruated. So that's
right.
Important. Yeah. And what was the other?
Well, actually, before we move on to the other two, I think talking about this, it's probably important to to differentiate between the lochia and the period, because a lot of people don't know the difference, and a lot of people bleed for a long time postpartum, and some people don't know where that ends and where a period might begin.
Yes.
It's very, that postpartum bleed is very, very variable.
And I think the main thing that kind of would distinguish it from the midwifery perspective, is that it basically is bright red for a few days, and then it becomes brown for a week or two, and then it becomes more whitish for another sort of 2 or 3 weeks. So those 3 colors are quite a way that we differentiate that things are like progressing along as they should. So when a woman has, let's say she's not exclusively breastfeeding, or she's not breastfeeding at all, then she'll go through that sort of 4 or 5 weeks of that lochia, and then it will maybe 2 or 3 weeks later she'll start to have some red spotting, and we'll go, okay, now that's menstruation.
And for the purposes of L.A.M, menstruation is defined as a bleed over 2 days. So if you have just a little bit of spotting, that's not necessarily classified as a bleed. It does need to be sustained, even just for a short period of time.
Okay.
So you don't have to exclude at the very first sign.
Right.
Okay, so criteria 2 is, are you giving any supplementary foods or fluids to your baby in addition to breastfeeding? So we mentioned before that L.A.M is suitable for people that are either fully breastfeeding or mostly breastfeeding. So the definition of fully breastfeeding can include exclusive breastfeeding, where you're giving the baby absolutely nothing other than breast milk. But it can also include the giving of like vitamins and some supplements. And research has shown that you can still use L.A.M and still rely on it as an effective contraceptive method if your baby's having less than 10% of their diet supplemented by other things. So that can be really helpful for women as they get into that later part of the first 6 months postpartum.
Okay, so less than 10%. All right.
Yeah, so
That's
that
interesting.
it does allow for a little bit of expressing, or for for the odd supplementary feed, or for a
Can we
small
just go back on
introduction
that?
of
So
solids.
when you say less than 10%, are you talking of less than 10% that's artificial milk, or less than 10% that's expressed breast milk? In other words, they're not suckling.
So I'm talking about not suckling. So
Right. Okay.
yeah, the research that we have hasn't really managed to capture expressing in the effectiveness data. So
Right.
we don't really know if expressing is as effective as breastfeeding, but it looks like probably not. You get a lot more of the hormonal cues feeding back to the hypothalamus when the baby is directly feeding from the breast, and those cues are quite important for helping to keep the hormone levels low enough to suppress ovulation. You can.
That's great. So, well, it's good to put that amount onto it. So, I mean, if we're thinking in terms that babies typically, are having probably 8 or 9 feeds a day anyway by the time that they are a few weeks old. So it would be sort of thinking in terms that, every second day or something like that, then, daddy could feed baby a bottle of expressed milk, while mum shoots out and does a yoga class or something like that. You could say, okay, every second day, expressed breast milk or artificial if you were using that, but preferably breast milk. But that's more from a health perspective. Yeah, so that sort of puts it into a little bit of perspective of, or, Saturday night, you could leave a bottle of expressed breast milk for, Nana and Grampy to look after the baby, so you're going to the movies or something. Gives you that a level of flexibility.
Yeah, just as an infrequent thing that provides extra flexibility. Absolutely. And there are women that do that are able to use this method after they've returned to work, and they might use a combination of expressing and night feeding. So night feeding is really, really effective for suppressing ovulation and keeping these hormone levels low. It's also really effective for preventing your sex life from going ahead. So effective on many counts. But yeah, feed overnight if you can't feed very frequently during the day, and if you are expressing at work, combining it with night feeding can really increase the effectiveness.
What sort of level of night feeding are you talking about?
2 feeds overnight.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're sort of talking about, maybe you've fed the baby at, baby's gone to bed at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. You're talking about a midnight feed, 4 a.m. feed. Yeah. And those feeds are pretty quick, generally.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're bed sharing with your baby, then you're likely to be already getting quite a lot of those hormonal cues overnight, even without you knowing.
Yeah. And when when I say those feeds tend to be quite quick, it's probably not the right word. They can be quite efficient. So
yes,
meaning that you're feeding the baby, might change their nappy, and they're straight back down. You're not having that whole interaction. Oh, happy time kind of thing. Leave that one for during the daylight hours.
Yeah, that's right.
Teaching your baby that it's, it might take you 15-20 minutes, sort of half an hour tops probably, to do the whole feed, maybe burp if you need to, change the nappy if you need to, and them tucked back down to bed.
Yeah. And if you're practicing bed sharing, often it's just rolling over, and
yes,
right, it's the easiest way to parent through the night.
Yeah. Okay, so what have we missed anything on the criteria?
Oh well, we're up to criteria number 2. So let me just check to see whether I've got anything
criteria
else here.
1 was, to recap, that you haven't had any menstruation of a couple of days.
That's right, more than 2 days.
And then criteria 2 was that over 90% of the feeds are latching breastfeeds.
Yeah, directly from the breast. That's right.
Our final criteria.
Final criteria is your baby older than 6 months? So this is, so L.A.M, according to that consensus statement that we looked at earlier, is those 3 criteria, and it does include is the baby older than 6 months of age, and that is
meaning that we want the baby to be under 6 months of age.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And so that's because at 6 months they're starting to have solids.
They're starting to have solids. They're starting to they're starting to breastfeed maybe less, and time between feeds increases. They might be starting to sleep more throughout the night. So those are the those are the most important reasons that we look at the 6 month age. But really, the 6 months it's kind of arbitrary. It's been chosen to reflect the World Health Organization recommendation for exclusive breastfeeding. So, but there are plenty of places around the world where exclusive breastfeeding and breastfeeding practices that meet the criteria for L.A.M continue into 9 months and even 12 months in some places.
And I guess that's the main thing, is that it's not that some magic bell of expiry has just suddenly occurred on the baby when they're 6 months of age. It's to do with the practices of how often that baby is receiving breast milk and how exclusively, because particularly if you've had a premature baby, or a small for gestation type baby, those women often are exclusively breastfeeding for longer, because they're getting them up to more a regular size to be starting to take in solid foods. So yeah, it's not an expiry date on the baby, it's more a lifestyle of what's happening with those feeds.
Yeah, that's right. And every woman returns to fertility in her own time. I was a voracious breastfeeder. My children sort of had solids introduced to them probably around about 7 months, when they showed they showed signs of being ready for it. I continued to breastfeed at night until they stopped asking for it, which was probably around about the age of 2. And I didn't get a period before 14 months for any of my 4 pregnancies. But then there are other women that follow exactly the same processes that I did, that are going to have a period return before 6 months. And we know that about 50% of women that start out using L.A.M don't meet the criteria by the end. And for some of them, it's because they've got their period back, and for others, it's because they've introduced solid foods, or they've used some other kind of supplement to the baby's diet in that time.
Yeah. Okay, so what about our health professionals? I mean, I know that, when you're a midwife or a doula and you're doing postnatal home visits, before that woman is discharged from your care, the conversation of contraception, should really, that's a topic that needs to come up. And yeah, so what are the other things that health professionals can do that will better support L.A.M? Because there certainly is a lack of general, considering the research that's behind it, the fact that half our population on the planet thereabouts are women, and we've been having babies for millions of years. It is crazy how little confidence females in general have about this process, which we've always had access to, and I think that there's just this fear of trusting of the body in general. There's a fear of trusting that it's going to be able to, naturally give birth, so they've sort of come off the baton of that. But what can our health professionals, particularly in the postpartum, do a little better or do a little differently, that we could be helping with this information?
Well, I think one of the most important things that health professionals can do is to have conversations with the women that they work with while they're pregnant, and help them to know that this is an option for them that they can embrace when they need it after the pregnancy. It's so common for women to walk out of the hospital with a prescription in their hand, not because they want it, but because it's been offered to them and they hadn't even thought about contraception. But if they had that conversation, if instead of that discharge conversation going along the lines of, have you thought about contraception? Do you want a prescription for the pill? It went along the lines of, have you thought about contraception? This is a method that will keep you protected for 6 months if you follow these criteria. And when you no longer are following those criteria, then have a conversation with your health professional about what's next. I think that would be a much more effective conversation to be having.
And it's frankly a more informative conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's saying, hey, there is another option. Certainly I have found that with women after they've had babies, they often feel almost more protective of their own bodies and a little bit more respectful of their own bodies, and often can hesitate to just go straight back onto a hormone-based contraception, whereas before being pregnant, that's often something that they don't even blink about, sort of thing. But because we've got such high levels of infertility and subfertility these days, 40% is to do with the female, 40% is to do with the male, 10% is to do with both of them, and 10% is still kind of in that unknown category. But certainly spending years and years on a hormone-based contraception before attempting to become pregnant is really not helpful on women's fertility to become pregnant, because when you've had 10 years of not ovulating, well, don't expect that you can just come off the pill and next month you're ovulating and it's all going to be tickety boo and you're back to full fertility. For some women, yes, that can happen, but for a lot it does not. And I think that when women realize that there's another option other than hormonal based, they can often be really interested to hear, well, tell me more about it. How does that work and how can I do that, instead of thinking that the pill's the only thing. And yeah, it would be generally, if women are leaving the hospital with a contraception prescription, it would generally be the obstetricians who are handing that out. And naughty them for bad performance, them for not giving better information on both, and not making women feel that L.A.M is, well, not feeling, but giving them the facts that L.A.M is a higher level of protection than that mini pill anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just a little bit of trust in the innate wisdom of the body. It would go a really long way, and I think it's such an empowering thing to be passing on to women. It's a beautiful thing to share, just helping a woman understand how her body works, and I guess how she has control over fertility cycles. I found it a really empowering skill, and I'm so glad that I took the time to learn that really early on in my reproductive life.
Yeah.
So I think
agree. So I guess the what ifs are in there, that's where women will get worried. So if I do miss, and miss a feed, and I have to supplement, you know, a few feeds in a row or a couple of feeds, you know, what do you say to them in that situation?
So go back to the 10% rule. So if it's just like 1 or 2 feeds over a period of a couple of days, you know, try and space out the feeds so that you're not having gaps that are longer than 4 hours during the day, 6 hours overnight. Or if you're feeding really frequently during the night, you can get away with less frequent feeds during the daytime. If you're not able to fulfill that criteria, it's a good idea to choose another method of contraception. And as I mentioned before, that period of lactation or amenorrhea after you have your baby is a really great time to learn some other skills, some other natural family planning skills. And actually one of those I think is a good one to talk about now, because it can help to give you a little bit of a clue that that you might be returning to fertility. And if you do have those gaps in your feeding schedule where you've I don't know, you've gone out and you've missed a couple of feeds, or your baby's sick and they're not feeding very often, if something happens, you can kind of get a feel for whether or not that's had an effect on your body, and whether you do need to pick up another method of contraception. So that sign is the cervix. So feeling for the position and the feel of the cervix, and you know, it's something that a lot of women feel a bit icky about, but it can be an incredibly reliable sign. So when you're returning to fertility, the cervix tends to move up really, really high in the vagina. It softens, goes from feeling hard and rubbery to feeling a little bit more soft and a little bit more open. And those are things that you can feel yourself. And they're changes that happen before ovulation occurs. So it gives you a really good clue that something's about to happen, and you might not be covered anymore.
And for those of you who have never felt your own cervix, so probably the easiest way to do that is just lying on your back with your knees up, sort of thing. And the cervix is obviously at the very top of your vagina, and a firm long cervix kind of feels like touching your nose. It's that kind of almost a cartilage sort of firmness to it. And a soft, you know, opening, sort of yielding cervix feels more like your lips.
That's right. Yeah,
that's how you can differentiate a little bit as well. And yeah, I mean, you absolutely should not feel icky about knowing that the feel of your own cervix. It's your body part. I mean, I guess that would apply with also, you know, women trying to return to work and wanting to keep aware of their of what's going on with their cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, good practice to employ, just a daily check.
And you can feel those differences of its change over the cycle.
Yeah. And you will feel a lot of changes happen during that postnatal time, because you're not cycling, but you know, as the ovaries kind of become more and more active, things do change. It's a great time to learn the changes that will happen during your cycle once the cycle returns to normal again.
Brilliant. And I guess another what if would be woman worrying that they could start to ovulate again quite quickly, and or maybe don't realize they're ovulating, or I mean, you know, those are just the what ifs that go along with being becoming more aware of how your own body functions.
That's right. Yeah, so just keeping an eye out, watching for those changes, you know, just watch. And if you are concerned, if you do notice changes that feel that it might be indicating return to fertility, then think about another contraceptive method, or start to use these other natural family planning methods.
And even your own libido can be, you know, a bit of an indicator as well.
That's right.
You know, if, you know, because bearing in mind that our bodies have changed practically hardly at all since we were cavemen. And, you know, so when things are in an optimal time to become pregnant, that's when we can, you know, so you're well fed, there's no famine, you know, these are things where the woman's body will go, oh, you know, oh, he's quite nice, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and it's funny because I always joke with the guys with that, you know, their concern is often, you know, because of course the male part of our species are ready to go again, you know, and so they're all rearing, and you know, because that's just how Mother Nature works, that they can spread their seed to multiple females in their flock, and you know, it doesn't have a big consequence on them, type of thing, if we, you know, take it down to its primal side. But often when guys have sort of said to me, you know, a month after the baby's born or so, you know, oh, I don't want to put on pressure, but I'm just kind of wondering, and I'm like, well, you know, just give her another, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and then the easiest way will be for you to just basically reduce her workload.
Yes.
So if you walk in the door and you know, the first thing you do is empty the dishwasher and bring it in some washing and bath the kids, and you do all these things, well, the woman suddenly goes, oh gosh, you know, I could have another baby in this environment. Isn't he looking sexy tonight?
Although you might want to give her a bit of warning that that's what you're after. She might think that you're offering her a nap.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, I love it. So is there anything else that we haven't covered over to do with L.A.M that you want to, anything else we should finish with?
Look, I think that we've covered it pretty well. It's pretty simple, and I think that that's the take home, is that this is something that's already there. You don't have to do anything. There's nothing special required. You just need to be breastfeeding your baby, trying not to have any gaps longer than 4 hours in the day, 6 hours overnight. You haven't had a period since your baby was born. Babies under 6 months not having any solid food, or not too much solid food, so that 10% rule. That's all you need to know. It's all there. There's nothing needed, and that's what's wonderful about this method, I think. I've actually had conversations with women in refugee situations that have had to use this as their only way of controlling whether they're going to have another baby or not, and it's just life-changing information for them.
And you know, we come back to the fact that scientifically, you know, it's over 99% proof, you know, effective against pregnancy. Wow, you know. And it's all there. Mother Nature's not silly.
No, Mother Nature's got it all sorted.
Yeah. It's so funny when, you know, because I've been a research midwife at university, I know myself that thing that the more that we study stuff, the more we are in awe of how the female body works. And, you know, the more research that's done in maternity healthcare, the more we sit back and go, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's more stuff we need to research. It's an incredibly clever system, all of it.
Yeah.
From conception through to labor to birth to lactation. It's just an amazingly clever system. And so it's about just respecting that and trusting that, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. And I see that we've gone through any questions that have come through. They've been answered, so that's all great.
Great.
And I just want to wish everybody a wonderful rest of their week. And thank you for your time. And just a heads up, Julie is actually one of our crew here, one of our volunteer crew at IMCO, at the International Integrated Maternity Healthcare Organisation. So just a little personal thank you from me as its founder to you, Julie, because the work that you do to help with all of this behind the scenes is always absolutely invaluable. And we're always looking for more volunteers. So those that are passionate about integrated maternity healthcare,
join the crew.
out to us. But would join a pretty amazing team. So thank you. And thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Kathy. Bye-bye.